The Manifestation of the Sons of God, Chapter 35, The Process of Sight. In this word, we want to address an issue that has greatly affected the ability of God's sons to truly see and in seeing change. At the crux of our capability to change lies the problem we have in seeing without filters, truly seeing. It is easy to take for granted our ability to see, since this is an inherent human capability that we've had since birth. Because sight comes naturally to us, we have made the assumption that what we see must be real and is indeed valid. So let's talk about this process of sight. What does it mean to see? The mind is an interesting facet of our being. To see involves more than just the physical act of sight. Seeing involves the entire cognitive process of the mind, which in effect does the seeing and then renders the interpretation. What you see with your eyes is just scratching the surface in this process of sight. The soul is a switchboard to your mind, and it's through a myriad of inputs, impressions, emotions, and responses that shape and form the process that we call seeing. This is really a very deep topic because we don't understand how much the soul mind that we have frames how we see, how we interpret what we see, and then registers that through our eyes and through our basic paradigm. To see the elimination of the soul and the regeneration of the mind affects deeply our ability to see what is right in front of us that we do not see. I don't know if that's ever bothered you, but many times in the Spirit, people have come and said, what you seek is right here. It's right in front of you. Don't you see it? And my answer is, no, I don't see it. Because there's a process of the renewing of the mind and the elimination of the soul input where the mind ceases to be the agency that processes your reality. Imagine being blind from birth, then being given eyesight for the first time. The natural assumption would be to think that you would immediately recognize and understand what you could now see. However, that wouldn't be the case. The truth would be that the mind would have to begin a process of learning to comprehend the images that you would now be receiving through the physical act of sight. Additionally, there would be an entirely new set of dynamics because the emotions would also affect your reasoning process that once again would shape your comprehension of what you're seeing. To see is not just the act of your eyes looking out, but the eyes are just a window of the soul. They're connected to the mind, and it's the mind that processes the images that determines what you see and interprets it to you. That's why the renewing of the mind is so critical. As you learn to see, you also learn your limitations and your belief patterns, in essence, your entire view of reality. Talk about tying the Lord's hands. The process of seeing through this conditioned lens of the mind and soul can be exasperating to the Lord when He said, I've given you everything. And yet, we've not been able to see it. We've not been able to comprehend what was in our midst. This is very challenging, for the Lord has been speaking for several years now about resurrection life. How close it is, it's right here. But we don't see it. Your unbelief, whether you can accept this or not, is learned. Your limitations are learned. And we've been on this long sojourn to see a complete letting go of all this conditioning. It has been closely studied and documented that as an infant begins to age, that it begins to lose the innate capacity to see and interact with the realm of spirit. The child begins to assimilate the oppressions of the culture in which it is being raised. As a child continues to age, the child's view of reality is constantly modified and channeled through the child's exposure to parents, siblings, and the society that it interacts with. That child is a microcosm of what the human race has become since the fall of man. Since birth, we really have been blind. And it's only now, through the progressive regeneration of the mind, that we're beginning to learn to see. We know that the mind and senses can be very deceiving. What you see with your eyes, as interpreted by your mind, as real as it may seem to be, often is not the reality you've assumed. When the Christian is born again, there's much more that happens than just a general awakening. His spirit has come alive, and he's begun the process of unlearning and learning, which will enable him to move into the deeper things of God. It will be through the agency of his spirit, in conjunction with the renewing of his mind, that he will begin to see. Psalms 51, Behold, I was shaped in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. We read in Psalms 51 how we've been born in iniquity and raised in iniquity, yet there remains a deliverance that will come forth and manifest in God's people, delivering them literally from this age. I know we would like to think that we're not a part of this age, but we've not understood the far-reaching ramification of what God's people have lived under. To come into greater spiritual sight, we will have to allow the Lord to reprogram the channels or avenues through which our mind has functioned. The truth is that what we see in this passing temporal realm is really not reality. Although we've taken strides in freeing ourselves from the spirit of this age, we are still bonded to a belief system which has been propagated by the spirits of this age since the beginning. Until we step more deeply into this regeneration of the mind, we're still walking as a part of this age. Our thinking and paradigm of reality that this age represents must be fully replaced within us. The sons are learning and beginning to learn to see. Their mind is being regenerated, and they're letting go of past conditions. We're understanding that to see involves more than just the physical act of sight. We're in a transition from seeing with our eyes to seeing through our spirit. This is a hard one to explain, and this needs to be an experience for you. Our sight or perception of reality cannot be dictated by our senses, our mind, or our soul, which basically it's one and the same. Our sight must be dictated by our spirit, and this cannot be done without a transformation within us as we transition to a life in the Spirit. Have you ever experienced the joy of reading the Scriptures when you find a nugget of truth that just comes alive for you? Then months later, or years later, read the same Scripture and see a truth you never saw before. That's just a small example to point out how we're in an ever-unfolding process of change. The truth or reality you perceived at one point will yield to a deeper insight as time goes on. The more you experience a deeper renewing of your mind, the greater the ability you will have to see and understand, and the more your mind will move out of the limitations and channels it has known. Romans 12, and do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. God is giving his people a new set of eyes and ears. Our greatest enemy has been our mind, which is always at enmity of God. How does that word go in Romans 8? Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can it be. What our new set of eyes may see, or our new set of ears may hear, will be new to our mind. This is new ground, and the mind will want to be quick to judge. And be careful, for the mind is going through a process that will enable it for the first time to grasp what is truly a new thing that God is doing. Much of what we seek is right here. It's right in front of us. We see it, but we don't see it. We've not been able to recognize what's right in front of us. However, as the Lord brings the deeper deliverances of sonship, you will begin to discover an entire world of spirit just awaiting you, anxiously awaiting. Everyone is focused on the coming Armageddon, but they're looking on the wrong level. The truth of what is happening is on a different dimension, but it takes eyes to see. We have tended to look for a manifestation of what we anticipate and not really see what is happening. You can be discouraged fairly easy if you continue to look for fulfillment of your concepts, for you will miss the unfolding of what God is really doing. As this deep renewal of the mind continues to unfold, you will experience a level of sight that's entirely new. You'll begin to see and hear with your spirit, and this is a significant change, for you will cease to function from the soul or the reasoning of your mind. This shift happens when you begin to function from your spirit, for you will see with the eyes of your spirit. As we begin to see with the eyes of our spirit, what is seen will be translated down to every level of our being. It will be born of our spirit, and as our spiritual eyes open, what our physical senses perceive will have the correct spiritual interpenetration. And this cannot happen without a deep renewing of the mind. This will become a living experience. It will become your reality. For sonship is not a theory. Sonship is an experience. Communication as we know it will transition as we walk more and more in the Spirit. We will hear and we will know more as an assimilation of energy as it flows between us. We will probably hear audibly, but those sounds will be on a level of vibration beyond this level of the senses. A whole new world of seeing and hearing is opening up for God's sons. God's sons have been on a path of becoming and changing as they have continued to shed the weights and the sins which have so easily beset them. Hebrews 12. Whether it's been the bonds and relationships that have fed you on the wrong level or the baggage of misperceptions and concepts of a lesser day, God's sons are pursuing after the deep changes necessary at this time. Perhaps what they have not understood is how deeply their views of reality have been hindered and colored by the controlling spirits of this present age.